you talk to me. Larry and I have to circle back.
All right, I think we are ready to get started this next session. My name is Dragan Gašović. I am a professor and chair in learning analytics and informatics at the University of Edinburgh, and the current president of Society for Learning Analytics Research, which will expire in about 3 hours. So I'll be a nobody. So, no, society will be much better because we are getting a way better president. So it's my great pleasure actually to introduce this panel. It nicely actually connects with the keynote that the team had, and also the attendance in this room also shows a very clear craving of the community to discuss different institutional development initiatives that are happening across the world. So we wanted to actually compose a panel and have a conversation which will be actually from different perspectives, from perspectives of senior institutional leaders, from the leaders in the field, from the leaders basically of different organizations that are providing learning analytics solutions and services, and also making sure that we are also tackling different types of national initiatives. Therefore, it's my really great pleasure that I'm introducing a panel today that we have. And they are not really seated as ordered there. They are alphabetically ordered there. They are seated slightly differently based on their own choice. Thus, we are respecting their agency. And we basically have Michael Webb, who comes from JISC. For all of those of you who don't know what JISC is, it's a large non-departmental government organization in the UK. They are responsible for different range of ICT projects and services provided for the entire higher education sector in the UK. And at the moment, they are also in charge of large-scale institutional, basically, support for the whole national infrastructure in learning analytics. So they are obviously having plenty to share. Brian Green is a senior leader and officially deputy associate principal, which is equivalent to vice provost, I think, in North American system, responsible for learning and teaching at the University of Strathclyde. And part of my reason is, besides that, Brian is doing some really innovative, amazing work in learning analytics, also to increase the level of representation of Scotland in this panel. And then we have Rebecca Ferguson, who comes from the Open University. Many of you probably heard of Rebecca. Rebecca is one of the pioneers of the field. She is a senior lecturer at the Open University, hopefully professor very soon based on her great work. And so she did some early reviews of the field in 2011 and 2012, high impact work, but also recently published a report which was commissioned by the European Commission about different types of institutional strategies, adoptions, policies, and all sorts of things that are relevant for many. We have Mike Sharkey, a vice president of analytics at Blackboard, and also, I think, long-term supporter and member of this community. I remember meeting Mike at a previous conference in Vancouver, 2012. I guess that was your first.
I was at Banff.
You were at Banff, so my memory is really poor. Really, so he's one of these early guys. So he was at the time at the University of Phoenix, then he had some great ideas, spin off a company, and then that company got acquired. And so he's now engaged into plenty of different types of activities, from research to institutional support and lots of practical things. And then we have James Folkestad, sorry. And James is basically a person who comes from Colorado State University. James is also attending the conference for a very long time. I know him since Stanford at LASI 2013. James recently just initiated a new center for the analytics of learning and teaching at Colorado State. And obviously, he has plenty to share with this community, and we wanted to have a different also perspective that is coming about another institutional model about learning analytics. So I introduced a little bit about different perspectives and different types of things that are happening in learning analytics, and individuals are involved, but I would like them just to give us a very quick pitch about some of the learning analytics activities that are at the moment involved with respect to some kind of infrastructure for learning analytics. So Michael, would you like to give a very quick pitch?
Yeah, sure. So in JISC, we're trying to develop a national learning analytics architecture. So there's quite a lot of parallels with the stuff we've just seen, but we're trying to do it across the country. So we are standardizing the way we collect data, providing shared infrastructure, a basic set of tools to gain insights from that data, and a whole set of APIs to build other stuff on top. So we're currently working with our first 20 or 30 institutions and adding more as we go.
Great. Brian, obviously you are an institutional leader. I'm sure, first of all, you are aware and probably involved into this initiative, but at the same time, I'm sure you're also aware of all other aspects of kind of people development, policy and strategy development, and what's kind of your perspective?
I mean, in some ways, I feel the least qualified to be here, but in other ways, I think much of what we've heard over the last, well, yesterday as part of the conference and also through the process and the workshops, it's about a journey into and through learning analytics, and that's where we're at Strathclyde. My own experience was I attended a meeting of University Scotland, which is the umbrella university body in Scotland, and someone talked about learning analytics for about 5 minutes, and I left the meeting thinking there's something in that for us, and I wasn't sure, one, what was in it, and two, what it was, but I decided to pursue it in a bit more detail. I attended the LAK conference at Poughkeepsie, and I found that to be very, very informative. Actually, a really welcoming and diverse community, and that helped, I think, reaffirm a commitment at institutional level for us to take this forward. It also had another advantage, I think, and that advantage remains, is that if I'm keen that we align developments in education with a wider institutional strategy and priorities. And we pride ourselves at Strathclyde in being an international technological university. And I saw learning analytics as a way to really press that button for education. And learning analytics is not the only thing we do. We're at the very early stages with it. But I do think it's helping us engage with wider institutional strategy. And we've started small. We're running 5 pilots. I have the privilege, I suppose, of leading a team, but it is very much a team approach that we have. And we've got a paper tomorrow afternoon which gives a bit of an overview of that. But that's my journey so far through it, and I guess there'll be a chance to see a bit more as we go through things.
Great. Rebecca, you've seen many different models, and obviously you explore different infrastructural issues as well. Could you just reflect on some of your recent work?
Yeah, so we carried out a European project thinking about how policy across Europe could be used to support learning analytics, to support education. We did big literature review, we did an inventory of tools, we did some case studies, so Mike was involved, Barbara was involved, Simon was involved, you know, some of the really big players around the world from different perspectives fed into that. We had a European-wide workshop to pull together on where we thought we ought to be going with learning analytics and how we thought we ought to be building that. And some things came out around the idea, for example, of you need a vision, you need to know where you're going with it. So you might start from the idea of, you know, I've heard of learning analytics, there must be something in it, and then the next stage is really formulating your vision of what you think you can achieve with it. It's a really important thing. I think another thing we found is really important is having somebody high level in your organisation who really owns it and takes leadership in it. So at the Open University, we started off with sort of lots of projects all over the place, some of them really duplicating what was happening. And it's when you have somebody at a high level who can make decisions, who can order people around things, who can really guide which direction you're going in. That's something we found to be really important. And we've also found that the challenges coming up are things like quality assurance. There's not really enough quality assurance going on around learning analytics, and there's not enough thinking about how we do that quality assurance. And there's also a desperate need for capacity building, not only for the people who are developing the learning analytics, but the people who are making use of them day to day to understand how to use them.
Great, thanks. Mike, I'm sure you are involved into many different types of organizations and universities with respect to infrastructural issues.
Yeah, and that's a nice perspective to have, but you know, the thing that's always been there with me is that it's about collaboration. So I've worked for a university doing analytics there. I've worked at my own company selling analytics product. I work for a large LMS company now selling data analytics tools. And it will never do me well to say, oh, buy our tool, this is the best one. And then 3 years later, I'm at another company and say, buy this tool, it's the best one. What really helps is this collaboration saying, and this is where I get dinged, I'm a horrible salesperson for the company, because I'll have a conversation and say, if you don't have this in place and this in place, you shouldn't be talking to us. Technology is not your problem. There are deeper problems there that if you don't solve that, no tool's going to do the job. So I'm very big on those conversations. I have conversations with folks in this room about that, and the more that I feel I can share, and having talked to multiple institutions across different areas, I think the rising tide lifts all ships.
Great, thanks. James, you started a new center. Tell us about it.
Sure. So we started a center on our campus, which is a faculty-driven research center. And so basically I tell people that if they are interested in being involved in this space, they should come. And if they're not, don't show up, right? So we're looking for people who are engaged and who are interested in doing this type of research. I do concur that you need a leader at the top of your organization to start one of these things up. I was lucky to have an advocate in Dr. Michael Palmquist, who was running at the time our Institute for Learning and Teaching on campus, and he funded the center at a fairly modest level to begin with, and continues to fund that as we move along. Dragon said that it's new. It's an official center at the university. It's relatively new. It's been around for about 9 months officially. But Mike and I have been working on it for about 3.5 years now. And it's really this sort of grassroots approach that we've taken to build up that center and get faculty involved. Now we have faculty from all of our colleges that are engaged in different research projects in the center. We have some centralized funding. We have centralized space. Some computers where there's specialized access, so it just continues to grow from sort of that grassroots approach.
Perfect, thanks. So Michael, I'd like to return back to you and about your project. Obviously, I think that's probably one of very few national initiatives in higher education, at least the only one that I am aware of, but please let me know if you know of any other initiative. And obviously you're at the forefront of that. And for many of you, basically, who are not necessarily that familiar with that initiative, it's a kind of a very thorough process from your early engagement from different stakeholders you had in the process, from students, from teaching staff, from university leaders, etc., to try to scope it down. You basically eventually had a tender and now had a coalition of different organizations, among which is Blackboard, also Apereo Foundation, open source, etc. But can you tell us a little bit about that experience, about all these different aspects, and in a way, what are the kind of potential challenges you are encountering, like people-related, strategy-related, technology-related?
Yeah, so I'll start at the beginning. So the way JISC works, the universities and colleges are our members. We provide core services to them, like the network, things like collections of resources. It was clear that there was kind of a gap in the middle of a bunch of services, so we consulted with them to ask them what they'd like us to look at. So somehow you had to get voices from 450 institutions down to something vaguely manageable. Luckily that bit happened before I joined JISC. So I arrived when we had 5 challenge areas, one of them being learning analytics. So I came in at the start of, okay, so they've asked us to do something with learning analytics. What on earth should we actually do? The straightforward thing that they kind of coalesced around was, we want dashboards. Now that's obviously a kind of dumb thing, but at least it's something to work with, okay? Because you can start then, first of all, what's the dashboards, right? They use it as a framework to actually have a discussion about what they should look like, what are people trying to do, what can we do, learn from other projects, other implementations. So one thing that we thought about was that learning analytics was essentially a new space. So we've got lots of systems in our institutions that we wouldn't design like that if we were starting again. So we kind of had a bit of a greenfield site. Think, what would this look like at a national level if we actually started from scratch? So obviously it's not completely from scratch because a lot of incoming. So we thought, yeah, we can do something there. What would that be? So we can think about what infrastructure would look like, what it makes sense for us to do, what we want to leave to the institutions, how we want to get the market to grow, essentially. So one of our early decisions was that we wanted to work with commercial providers, with open source providers of solutions, allow the institutions to do things themselves. So there quite clearly wasn't one size fits all. Next thing, which we've already touched around, was the concept that institutions may or may not be ready, they don't know whether they are, so we need to get some kind of supporting process in place for that. So we worked with a few institutions that have done that sort of thing before to get some kind of process. Next thing was that to make it work, we thought we needed to build a community. So we have very successful events that run 100 or so learning analytics practitioners every quarter come and share what we're doing. So we have the kind of service to find out whether you're ready, the idea of building an architecture, and the concept of building a community. Then you get to the difficult side, which is the practical bit. So at that point, we kind of looked at previous architectures that have potential to scale, in particular a lot of the work done by Apereo, the Open Learning Analytics, built on that and kind of designed something that we thought would work at a national level, put it out for tender and crossed our fingers. So it was kind of a nervous kind of wait then, because we had the budget for it, whether anybody would actually step up to the plate. They did, so we got representatives from some of the companies actually in the room here. Tribal and Blackboard were a couple of our partners. So at that point, it was a case of working through the detail, figuring out how we do things like standardized data, provide enough basic services for institutions to do something interesting, and leave enough space for commercial people to add value, because quite clearly the last thing we want to do is to essentially stifle innovation. The bit that we spent far more time than I had anticipated, and is still a great source of pain, is all the legal side. So I grossly underestimated how long that would take. It has been incredibly painful, more for one of my colleagues that has to deal with it. But I think, we're getting there now. We're getting a standardised set of legal documents and frameworks that will make the whole thing work.
Good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. I think that's really kind of very comprehensive and good summary. But I'd like now to get a different perspective of a participant in the project. First of all, in terms of how that initiative kind of connects with some of your existing initiatives, and also potentially challenges and policy implications.
We jumped at the opportunity to be involved with the JISC process overall. I saw it as a really quick way into this for us. And I guess the role that I have allows me to pull some people together on it. I remember the meeting that we had with JISC. There were 3 staff from JISC came up to Strathclyde, myself, another deputy principal, 2 members of our learning enhancement team, including one of our DLE specialists. And we sat down and talked to them. They mentioned the idea that they were piloting, I think it was the Blackboard Learning Analytics Readiness tool. We'd time out time, we went into a huddle. 1 minute later, we'll volunteer. They then asked for volunteers around the app process that was being developed. Again, it took us a little longer, maybe 2 minutes to agree to that one. I just felt it was a really good way into it, and the networking events have been really helpful. I mean, my colleague Ainsley, who's here with me, we're hosting the next one at Strathclyde, and that's us going from a 0 start to being quite embedded in the process. One of the other real advantages in undergoing the pilot work and also the readiness process was that we took a message from an initial group of 4 or 5 people and shared that engagement across 80 to 90 members of the university community. Some of them were course leaders, some of them were teaching staff, or faculty staff, some course administrators, some systems developers, but really importantly, it also involved our students in the process. And I think joining that up was very, very helpful for us because it helped embed the communication within the institution. Having said that, we have not cracked it. It's still a relatively small scale thing, but I can track colleagues into different parts of the university, both in the academic faculties and in professional services, as well as into the Students' Association, who've participated at some level in the process. And when we get to a stage to be able to roll things out, I think this will have proved valuable. We've had some challenges around data transfer, the legality side, particularly with the app, but we'll sort that. That will be okay. I think it probably is just about now. So it's been a positive experience, not only in terms of growing understanding of learning analytics, but also helping with VIAM.
Right. Yeah, great. Mike, you participated also in this project, well, at least your organization. Probably are aware of some of the potential activities. How would you contrast these types of activities with some other experience that you have in the US? And what are the potential challenges that you, as the kind of supplier, experience, and potential benefits and the value?
So, what JISC is doing is unique and very positive. I mean, there are some, you look at some consortia like what Unison is doing. There's some similar kind of threads there. So that the collaboration piece is very positive. I think it's very complementary with the commercial side. So you look at what Michael said and trying to make sure that the infrastructure they put in is compatible with multiple infrastructures in commercial. They're not just saying we built this tool on top of it. I think that's a positive thing because one thing I know about the education space, people don't settle on one tool, right? That's just not the way it works, right? You can go out on the outside of education and say, Salesforce dominates in CRM, right? And that's sort of, the one of choice. Great. There are examples, ERP systems, where everyone, hey, has one or two. It's not that way in education. So having been on the institutional side and on the vendor side, if one's goal is, from the commercial side, we want to be the one analytics thing to rule them all, I wouldn't bet on that horse. So that needs to come into play on either side. Right? On the institution, there might be this waiting around, well, who's the dominant player? Should we pick this tool? That'll be the great one. That won't work as well, because I don't think things come out. You look at names that come up, it's ebb and flow, like, oh, this was the hottest one, and they got millions of dollars in funding, and now you don't hear about them anymore, and they kind of, petered away and went there. So I think if you look at the landscape, that's a truism. The thing I would say is the similarities, whether you're approaching it from an institution side, a third party like a JISC or a consortium, or a commercial side, to me they're sort of an absolute when you look at the project. And this is where I was a radio DJ in college, and to me it's all about the audience, right? It's not about what I want to say, it's what you guys are here for. And I kind of sum up any analytics project in three things. One is, what's that problem you're trying to solve? Right? So putting that question, we went through this, we had the fail-a-thon on Monday, some of this came out in that group. What's that question you're trying to answer, the problem you're trying to solve? Is it a retention thing? Is it a learning thing? Is it an admissions thing? Pick one and start there. Second has to do with what Tim said this morning about the information agency. Who gets the data? You're going to be generating some information, a data, a dashboard, a number. Who's going to get that? Because that person is going to be very key. If it's a faculty member, if it's a student, if it's an advisor, understand what's the question, who's going to get it? And then the third thing is, what is that person going to be expected to do about it? Are they going to call a student? Are they going to send a mass email somewhere? Are they going to drop someone out of their program? There's an action that has to be taken, and it's going to be taken by a human. So if you look at any of these initiatives, right, there's infrastructure, there's data, all that technology is secondary. None of that really matters if you don't know what the problem you're trying to solve is, who you're going to give the information to, and what they're expected to do about it. So I kind of have that as this truism across, and that to me is the real infrastructure, right? Knowing that sort of, which if you look at these readiness things, right? JISC did this with Unicon, the readiness. We've got readiness. All of them have that same nugget of those sort of foundational pieces of analytics.
Great. James, you obviously didn't have the pleasure or the benefit of participate in a national project which provides this type of infrastructure as well as all sorts of resources. So from your perspective, especially as an institution always invested into a new center for learning analytics, then the question is how you would suggest, or what are those potential pathways and the models, and maybe what model your institution is taking as you are increasing operational capacity? Because I recently talked with a learning analytics provider, service provider, and they basically said, yeah, there's lots of interest in many institutions to implement certain things, but then there's really no real operational capacity. That's one thing. And the other thing is, Rebecca also previously pointed out the importance of leadership. So how do we actually overcome some of these barriers?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a tough question. You know, I think I'm hearing common themes, and we keep hearing common themes about sort of the growing pains, I guess, of analytics on campuses, and you know, I kind of want to lean towards that a little bit and talk about some of the maybe lessons learned or the pains that we're sort of wrestling with right now. But you know, when we start, you know, when I started the center, it was really rosy, you know, because we had basically academics in the center and no interest from administration at all. They didn't really have any idea what we were talking about, and unfortunately we educated them. And then they started to ask more and more questions and get more and more involved. So, you know, I think the theme that I keep hearing is, one of the themes I've heard from a number of people is this sort of this tension almost between administration wanting to get things done quickly and researchers wanting to do things that are meaningful. So, you know, a bit of my time as the director, I don't know if it's complete frustration or it's just something that I have to do is sort of maintaining the optics of those types of tensions. So I'm constantly thinking about how do we keep my faculty engaged at this research level and feeling comfortable about analytics. At the same time, we have administration talking about bringing in large corporations to collaborate. You know, I don't see those as necessarily being, you know, opposed, but there's a lot of management that has to go into those types of relationships and getting them to work. So that's some of the stuff that I'm focused on right now.
Great, thanks, James. Rebecca, I just intentionally kind of saved you for wrapping up. This is in the CSCL literature. Your role is now summarizer, right? So that's usually the role that typically benefits the most. So you basically did all this review and synthesize, and you mentioned basically one of the strategies, of course, increased leadership. But then what are other strategies you observed in your work? And I know that you had some other previous interest as well, is in development strategy and developing policy. How would you describe some of the existing activities? How would you describe some of the promising models, but also some models that are much less promising?
I think to start with the much less promising, I think it's a problem that we all struggle with, is we are the learning analytics people. If we just go to somebody and say, here are learning analytics, take on learning analytics, that's not very useful to them, because that is a technology-led approach. That's sort of technology deterministic. If you have this technology, all your problems will be solved. What you need to start with is, what problems do you have in the first place? So, I mean, that's the problem that obviously came up with JISC. They said, we want dashboards. Well, you know, a dashboard is just a thing. I can see you are wincing at that. What problem are you solving? So our university at the moment, the problem we're having is around revenue. Our funding model has changed. Our university wants to know how you can use learning analytics to increase revenue. But at UTS, they're thinking about how can you use it to help the students to learn. How can you use learning analytics to help students to reflect? Now, each institution has got different things that it is focused on, and it's a question of thinking, well, how can learning analytics support that? And does learning analytics support that? Because learning analytics doesn't solve every problem. So people sometimes say, well, you don't see very much use of learning analytics in K-12 in schools. Well, perhaps that's because they haven't got any problems that learning analytics is the best solution for. It may be the best solution, but you've got to clarify why that is the case. And one of the models which is being used for rolling out learning analytics, which I know Dragan has been using, is the Roma model, which is a sort of cyclical model about thinking first about what are you trying to achieve, and then bringing stakeholders on board and involving people, not making learning analytics something which is imposed upon them or done to them, but something that they have been engaged in creating and seeing a reason for and building into their practice. And actually, in the Roman model, the actual implementation of learning analytics is a very small section of it. It's building the capacity and the situation for learning analytics, and then thinking about, has that worked, and assessing it and then changing. And I think that's something we don't do very much in education with our tools. We spend a lot of time thinking about, did our students pass or didn't our students pass? But when we bring in a new tool, when we bring in an interactive whiteboard or new learning management system, we don't spend a lot of time thinking carefully about, okay, what were we aiming to do there? How have we assessed that? Did it make a difference? What do we need to change? And that's, I think, a stage in the cycle that very few of us have managed to pick up on.
Sure.
And that may be experience you've had from the Sheila project.
That's
taking people through that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in very few cases, we are really getting a sufficient process that is going on. And in very few cases, we are seeing also involvement of all relevant stakeholders. In many cases, basically, the process is very similar to what you described. Basically, comes up with a particular piece of technology, and then relevant stakeholders are kind of trying to be involved into that process without really having any clear questions on the types of issues they would like to tackle. So on that note, and Brian, obviously as a senior institutional leader, and you mentioned before some level of kind of stakeholder involvement, teaching staff, etc. So part of the story is then what are the kind of potential policy implications of learning analytics? Do you see policy for learning analytics something that is part of, say, learning and teaching strategy for institution? Because in a way it sits between IT and also learning and teaching. And in Edinburgh we basically have two separate groups, like knowledge and strategy group, and then the other group is basically learning and teaching. And then it's always that tension. And there's the other thing, which basically is a kind of my reflection on the conversation I had yesterday with Robin Papas regarding basically potential new models or workflows, not workload, workflows for teaching that are kind of based on, or informed, better to say, with learning analytics.
We're at the early stages, and so the second question is one in terms of workflow and the related implications in individuals. We're probably not ready to look at that. Although I would say I would see that ultimately as being part of reflective professional practice as a teacher. And I trust my colleagues to be committed in wanting to teach, and that's the vast majority. I think in every institution there is the odd person who is really not particularly committed to it, but I think my view is that people are positive about teaching, they're positive about student experience, and they're positive about learning enhancement. So the workflow area, I think, will come with us in time, but I think as an institution we increasingly recognise the importance of teaching when it comes to individuals and to workload and to recognition. The strategy policy area, I still get confused at times between what is a policy and what's a strategy. I think sometimes policy can seem slightly heavy-handed. And I think the approach that we're taking is to try to build an overall institutional strategy for learning analytics. But it will be located very much within a wider education strategy. I think it will probably lean more towards digital education in our case, but I think that's where we see the experience that we have, the capacity that we have probably links a bit more closely with that. The other context for us is, because Scotland's a small country, we've got quite a collaborative and integrated focus on education. As I said earlier, we have an overarching body in Universities Scotland. We also work very closely in quality assurance terms with the QAA Scotland, the Quality Assurance Agency for Scotland. And we've got a different approach to quality assurance within the Scottish sector relative to the rest of the UK. And that's very much an enhancement-driven approach to education. And I think that gives us, again, a positive outlet for analytics. We run, as part of that process, a transition, an enhancement thematic approach. The next enhancement theme is likely to be somewhere around evidence-based enhancement. So the link will be there. I think that will provide a location for learning analytics along with other data-related matters. So I think we'll locate it in terms of an enhancement focus, probably more leaning towards digital education. Having said that, a number of the classes and programs will probably be in a blended form or a multi-mode form. And so I think we'll benefit across the institution, but probably more in terms of the digital education side in our case, but that could be different in other institutions.
Great, thanks. James, you obviously have a different institution you're working with and trying to support. So one perspective is basically to reflect on the stakeholder buy-in, right? So you discuss basically from the perspective of senior leadership buy-in. But then the question is how to promote that stakeholder buy-in. Do you see basically learning analytics as a potential way to promote innovation in teaching and perhaps teaching excellence and to a certain extent overall learning experience?
Yeah, so that's basically, when we're talking about strategy, we work very little on necessarily policy, but our strategy is really a diffusion strategy from my perspective. It's, we seed these things and we show evidence that we're having some success in impacting learning and teaching. And then we disseminate that as widely as we can to get other people to engage in more research in the space. So, the strategy that we've taken is really sort of that grassroots diffusion approach, and then exposing administration and other faculty to those research projects.
Right. So Michael, with respect to your project, I mean, obviously you worked with many institutions. To what extent do you actually see that institutions are seeing the use of your infrastructure, analytics in general, and some of the principles? Because you're also coming with a code of practice, which basically has lots of kind of ethical and privacy-related implications, as a kind of opportunity to promote innovation in learning and teaching.
I think that they tend to come at it to think, how does it align to some kind of innovation program or process that we already have? So we're not seeing many say, we want to do learning analytics. They will say, we have a program which is to improve tutor support, to improve teaching. How can you help us? So it tends to be in that direction. We've had some institutions who, from the readiness, have basically just seen that they have no initiative, that this can align with, realise the gaps, and have said, right, okay, that's our job for the next 2 years. We need to, there's no point us knowing students at risk, teaching practice, because we've got no process to deal with that at the moment. That's our job next, we'll come back later. So, it's a real mixed bag, but the best ones have been when there's been a clear initiative that's driven by something the institution wants to achieve, and what we're doing fits into it.
Great. And just before I finish this series of questions, I have just one last topic that I'd like to explore, because we always define the field of learning analytics kind of as the field of research and practice. And even Tim earlier hinted something that I've been pretty much doing all my career is pretty much, whenever I'm teaching, I'm seeing it also as a research activity. And I can't possibly think of my teaching without being also doing research about my teaching as well. So Rebecca, obviously you are well positioned as a researcher and somebody who looked into different types of models and strategies. Where do you see that the role of research is in learning analytics adoption and overall kind of promotion of a much stronger or better place for evidence-based decision-making related to our teaching? And what are potential challenges that you see in that process?
I think one of the ways in which research can help is about thinking about where we can go with learning analytics, because I think people have quite a limited view of what you can achieve with learning analytics, especially if you're coming from outside the field. You know, you've heard of dashboards, you've heard of predictive modelling. You can't really get much further than that. I think research has a role in really taking the possibilities forward. You know, we're seeing these possibilities around the analysis of discourse, the analysis of people working together in groups, the analysis of reflection, in actually helping students to build the skills that help them to learn, rather than just continuing with the practices that are happening at the moment. So the possibilities for research to support innovations in pedagogy, which are really learning analytics can underpin and move things forward. So I think that's a really important thing to do. I think there's also an important thing around using research to see that learning analytics is making a difference, to find the ways in which it is making a difference, to find the ways in which it's not doing the things that we expected. For example, we have seen examples of predictive models where students are told, you know, this is your predictive model. Oh, I'm predicted to drop out. I'm going to drop out then. And you see a lot of student dropout. Now, you could present that positively in terms of, oh, well, those students would have been wasting their time taking the course, possibly. But unless there's any evidence of that, what you've actually done is you've encouraged student dropout. So we need to be thinking through what effects are we having and how can we use these most effectively. So one of the things that's happening at the Open University, and Bart Rientos is leading on this work, is bringing together learning design and learning analytics, so we can really crunch figures to see what learning designs are supporting students, which learning designs are not proving helpful, and allowing us to do things that we couldn't do before. And so I think the role of researchers is to find those things that we couldn't do before and make that possible.
Perfect, great. Mike, just to basically ask you a quick reaction on this kind of very same topic, but basically the role of collaboration between industry and researchers or academia around different types of research issues and potential impact in practice, infrastructural impact and different types of models you have seen and you would like to see in the future.
Sure. So looking at the other side of that, that it's okay if there's not a strong research backing of your initiative. So you're a school, you're a department of one, right? You know there's a problem you want to solve with analytics. If having underpinning research or doing that research jointly is something that would hinder and take you years to get something done, I'm always a believer that it's okay to try something small, try an initiative. The collaboration, where that comes into play, is you learn from peers, and someone else has tried it. You know, there's the medical do no harm, right? So as long as you're within the bounds of IRB, do no harm, what's the potential downside, it's okay. And I hope that's not a kind of heresy to say that. I mean, you know, at some institutions it might be, right? You can't do anything unless it's got the full backing. But having, in my role, having seen different institutions, different levels, open admit, R1s, big, small, people are different. And so I think that's an okay approach. From the commercial side, now we get in the world of, do you take the research and findings from the commercial vendor? And obviously it's caveat emptor, right? You're not going to sit there and say, oh, the vendor gave me this white paper, so it must be great. I'll be the first to say there are varying degrees of that across vendors, and it very much is caveat emptor. You know, I'll put in a plug for us. My colleague John Whitmer is in the audience. He runs data science for all of Blackboard. He's worked with large institutions. We think we're pretty good at being respectful and not putting out big fluffy numbers about what analytics does. I just did a blog post on Monday. Analytics isn't a thing. People shouldn't go out and like, I want to buy analytics. That's not what you should be looking for. And if people are trying to sell you analytics, they're probably not the person you want to buy something from. So, you know, I think if you look at research in that respect, collaboration is, to me, is the best part, because I think those that are really doing the full-blown research underpinning, I think that's a minority. I think most people, if you asked around, are like, sure, I would like to, but I don't know if I really have the time resources, so let me collaborate, let me see what other people are doing and stand on their shoulders in order to do what I'm trying to do.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Mike. And on that note, I would like to open to the audience for some questions, concerns, ideas. Please speak up. Simon, and then here, Chris.
I was very struck, James, by something you said, because I almost said exactly the same words in several conversations I'm having with people at the moment running a centre that wants to be research-inspired, breaking new ground, doing the kinds of things Rebecca's talking about, but also delivering a service into the university from people who just have a very basic data science problem that they want fixing. I'm wondering whether, I'd love to talk more about this with you offline, but sure. Can you share a few more thoughts about how we balance that tension between research-inspired stuff and having an important service role to impact the organization perhaps on quite fast timescales?
Yeah, it's hard for me to address the time scale. The time scale piece is difficult. I think we're emerging, right? I mean, and it's going to take time. So I don't really believe that we can accelerate what we're working on anyway, to any large degree. But I think that a lot of the things that I've heard up here and that I started to reflect on are within our research designs. We're really interested in trying to build digital objects that tell us something about how a student is behaving, in the learning environment. Okay, we're not really looking to look at necessarily the relationships between those behaviors in final grade. We're looking for evidence that can tell us things that we know theoretically are important for learning, and then create some sort of formative feedback for a student. And that's probably going to be a face-to-face formative feedback to start with. I don't know if this addresses your question, but I'd love to talk to you more about your center and sort of the paths that you've been down and compare notes.
Great, thanks. Chris?
Yeah, this is my first LAK conference. I'm a human-computer interaction researcher, and to me this sounds a lot like user-centered design, trying to use evidence to motivate systems and practices that lead to our goals. And and I'm trying to form. I've been doing quote-unquote learning analytics for a while. I didn't really call it that for a while, but the idea that we're trying to build infrastructure and systems to provide resources for making evidence-based decisions. Does that seem fair? As a newcomer coming into this.
First of all, just on that note, you are one of many. I think majority of us came the same way to learning analytics. We were doing that, and then HCR or different other pathways, psychology, sociology, and we were all doing something like, we didn't know how to call it, and all of a sudden we called it learning analytics. So that's a good point. Rebecca, do you want to take that question? Mike?
No one has to say anything.
I'll say on the user-centered design, there's something that I go back to. So if I think of user-centered design in the non-education space, and so I've got colleagues and have been in that world, the difference I point out a lot is that the end goal of the task in user-centered design is much more fuzzy in education, right? Because it's learning, and I've said this before, right? People do the Amazon analogy, right? Oh, people like you bought this and that. Well, there's a really, really well-defined outcome in Amazon. You bought something, right? And it's a single button, and it's a row in a database. You don't have that in learning, right? Hey, I now know how to add fractions, right? Now let's write that in the database. On this date, this time, Mike learned how to add fractions. So because that outcome, that dependent, is so much more squishy, it changes that role. But again, that's just with my perspective of user design.
Right.
Obviously, good relationship, but I think that changes the equation.
Right. Go ahead.
I think that we're doing some work with HCI and thinking about cognitive load in systems that we're building and how to minimize cognitive load. I think that these type of efforts take huge teams. And the HCI, I'm not an expert in HCI, but we need people that have that background to tell and to help build systems that can help people learn. You know, minimizing cognitive load could literally help people learn, right? Could potentially help people learn. So we need to be thinking about it.
And that's a good point there, and many of the systems at the moment are not like that. There's a slight tension I think we need to work on in the future, and basically lots of user-centered design really goes by basically what learners or users want, right? But we also know in research in the learning sciences that users don't necessarily, learners don't necessarily know what's good always for them, right? And like learning styles, we know that's basically highly disputed thing. And Paul Kirchner from the Open University of the Netherlands, he has basically hold these things like whether really learners know what they want, right? And so I think that kind of user-centered design should also help us address some of these issues and promote some of these good study practices rather than just basically go along with whatever users want. Adam?
Slightly related to this, actually. One of my concerns is the ability for the users to make meaningful interpretations of the analytics we provide to them, and to take actions which are defensible and not to misunderstand what appears to be this kind of hard numerical or quantitative kind of results. I think it's been touched on occasionally, but I wonder if you've got any thoughts on how we approach that. Is this fundamentally about the design of our interfaces, or how do we match in with that knowledge and understanding among our users about what this information means?
Somebody touched upon that in the fail-a-thon. They said they had been, I can't remember who it was, said they'd been producing sort of example dashboards for students which visualise data. But these were completely made up. These were like the examples of what you present to students. And he said the problem was when you present it to students, they just took it as gospel. And they said, oh yeah, that's me, what shall I do about it? It's not you, this is made up data. But I'm sort of remembered, you know, Derren Brown doing magic, that if you present people with a sort of summary of themselves, and astrologers do this as well, you present people with a sufficiently generic representation, they will take it as their own, and they will say it is uncannily like them. And I think we can run into that problem with learning analytics, that we present something which we think is very nuanced, and you know we give all the reasons for it, but we don't have people reading it with sufficient data literacy to understand that, and they're doing something much more crude with it than we're expecting. And I think that must be something you struggle with.
Yeah,
right?
the UI side of it comes into play, right? This is, I'm a data nerd, I track stuff and I've done charts and fantasy baseball and it's all great. That's not the customer here, right? This is the bar going up, is the bar going down? Is it red, is it green? And it sounds paternalistic when you sort of simplify to that level, but you really have to, because I always go back to core signals, right? One of the first ones 10 years ago, and they put a red, yellow, green light in front of Purdue engineering students saying on track, off track. Well, if you're an engineering student at Purdue, you probably have the wherewithal to react properly to a light changing color. That's in the minority of a lot of users. So going back to the who is getting the information and what do you expect them to do with it, it's all about that presentation. If you give a student a scatter chart plot that's multicolored, are you really, they may be of the kind of student, maybe they're master's students in engineering and can do it, but you know, don't jump into that.
So the danger here though is that in trying to hide things, we're taking away some of the transparency of what we're doing. We're then embodying my worldview in something, and I think there's a danger there in the kind of the hidden controller.
You can say that anything, right?
Yeah, sure.
Anything. If I give you 100% information, it would be a tome this big. So anything can have that argument against it. But it's fair.
I'd like to take one more question, if possible. Yes, please.
Just along those lines, though, the medium is the message a bit here, and so the Wall Street Journal now has R-squareds on its scatter plots, and so that so that wouldn't have been true 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and I think we as a society are getting better at this, and you know, in our attempts to create an adaptive learner who's going to be learning still even 10 years after they finish, 20 years after they finish, and the like. These sorts of mechanisms allow us to increase the data literacy of the average learner, and so that there's a teaching opportunity here that we should incorporate in our design, and not just a UI that transmits in a.
If that's part, absolutely, that is an absolutely valid part of the strategy, but not everyone's going to choose that, right? I think there's going to be, not everyone's going to read the New York Times and know what an R-squared is, as half the people in this country voted for and figured out. But no,
It's a chicken and egg thing, right? And so
it's a choice. I think it's more of a strategy.
Yeah,
I think it's more of a strategy, right? If you say that we want to increase information literacy as part of this, awesome, then you design the implementation and training and rollout and designs around that strategy. If you say we want to do a little bit of lowest common denominator, then you design around that. So both are valid choices as long as you're cognizant. Yep, great point.
We certainly found we've had to massively simplify the stuff that we don't, because to start with, essentially when we kind of road tested our first visualizations, the users just looked and went, what? You know, so it went back to really simple stuff and use a storytelling technique. So when we work with an institution, we'll pick a few bits of data that we can construct a story and say, so you're speaking to your student, the data's showing you this, you don't know why, but you know, maybe you want to start a discussion. So try and, you know, contextualize it away from what's the data, but what's the story.
Great, thanks very much. And on that note, I think we can conclude this panel. Just before we conclude the panel, I'd like to encourage everybody to attend our annual general meeting of the Society for Learning Analytics Research, which will be basically on the ground floor of this building. It starts about 12:30 to 12, about 1. More like 1. So grab your lunch, eat your lunch, and then join us. We would really like to get your input into the ways how we should be doing things, and also get lots of your feedback, and also explain some of the ideas how some of our members and those who are not could potentially be involved in that process. So please enjoy us, and also enjoy in my fall.
Can we use the voting system?
Sure.
I've been looking at those voting buttons.
Sure. Okay, thanks very much, and thanks very much to our panelists.